everybody, my name is Chloe Oswald and I'm a former City of Glasgow College student. I work at the Gleneagles Hotel in Scotland doing pastry, and today I'm going to show you and take you through the process of making a moulded chocolate. So I have made a video on tempering chocolate if you guys want to check that out, and we're going to use tempered chocolate as part of this process. But basically, to start us off, I've got a chocolate mould, or a bonbon mould as we would call it. This is just a polycarbonate mould, half spheres. It's a nice easy shape to work with if you're just starting out. There's no nooks or crannies or corners. We don't really like corners. So then there's not really much chance of air bubbles. When you're making moulded chocolates, you always have to clean and polish the mould. So it's really the fundamentals, it's the basic things that we do. All these little steps make a beautiful product, and if you want a beautiful shiny chocolate at the end of this, you have to take the time to make sure your mould is sparkling clean and shiny. So I'm just going to polish this up with a cotton pad, and I just go into every single cavity and polish it up, really putting pressure on it. Again, this just leaves us with a really nice end result. It gives us that shine. If there's any dirt in the mould, it picks up on that. If there's any dust in there or any residue from when you've used it before and maybe not cleaned it right, it just takes all that away. So it's really important that you do this step and don't skip this, as tempting as it may be. Okay, perfect. So once your mould's all polished up, you want to think about the design. So today I'm going to make salted caramel chocolates, and usually with my chocolates I like to choose a colour that reflects what's inside it. So if it was oranges, I'd do orange. If it was strawberries, I'd do red or pink. I love a pink. But with salted caramel it's a bit different because all we've really got is gold or brown, and I've done a lot of that, so I think I'm just going to go some blue and white to represent the sea, from the sea salt that's in the caramel. So what I'm going to do for this is I have cocoa butter here. So cocoa butter is a byproduct of the chocolate process, the chocolate making process, but you can buy it now coloured, which is what a lot of pastry chefs use to colour chocolate moulds or desserts, or to finish mousses or sprays. So I use my cocoa butter at 30 degrees, the same as what I'm working with chocolate. You have to temper it just the same. And all I'm going to do is pop a little bit on my brush here, and then just fleck it into the mould. So I'm just taking my time with that and flecking a wee bit of white into the mould. Lovely. And then once I've done that, you just want to clean your mould off so that you've got a nice clean base to work with. So once my speckles are done and I've just left them for a couple of minutes to set up, I'm going to go in with some shimmer powder. So this is just silver luster powder, and it's just going to give us a nice little glittery finish to that. So I'm just dusting every cavity. Again, this is just a makeup brush, a clean makeup brush. You can get them from Boots or any other makeup shop. Really, you can get them from Pound Shop, and then just make sure you obviously keep them separate so they're just for dusting. So once every cavity's got a little shimmer in it, again just clean the mould off again, and then I'm going to go in with my glue. I've just got a sponge here. It's just like arts and crafts. I've just got a sponge here, and I'm just going to dab it on the paper a few times to make sure there's not too much chocolate, too much cocoa butter. And then again, I'm just going to dab it into the mould, into each cavity, making sure that I'm working with this cocoa butter at 30 degrees, because if it's too hot, it'll just melt all the white off. and we don't want that. Again, just dabbing it on the paper each time to make sure that we're not taking too much cocoa butter. The last thing we want is a really thick layer of cocoa butter in the bonbon shell. It needs to be thin. You don't want that fat sitting on your palate when you're eating the chocolate. So it's really important to keep it nice and thin. And again, we'll clean it off. So what we're left with is a lovely blue shell, a nice clean mould, and we're ready to go in with our chocolate. So our next job is to cast the moulds. So to cast the mould, I've got a bowl of our tempered chocolate from earlier and a ladle, and then I've got my 2 scrapers again. I'm going to need them. So what we do is we hold the mould like so that your fingers are touching the first kind of rung and your thumb's just supporting it at the edge here. And you're going to fill from the back and bring it forward, just filling each cavity with chocolate. Perfect. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take the scraper and we're just going to tap the mould to get rid of any air bubbles and just let that chocolate settle in. And what you want to do is push the chocolate off the first half of the mould, then again further up, and then again off the end. And what you're doing every time in between is just scraping your palette knife off and then cleaning the sides so you're left with a nice clean edges. And we're just going to tap that out, clean this off, so that all the air bubbles in there are tapped out. We don't want any holes in the top of our chocolate, because when we're filling this with a ganache, it means that we won't have a long shelf life because it won't be food safe. Next, we're just going to tip it out and tap all that chocolate out. We're keeping it upside down and we're keeping it as straight as we can so that the chocolate flows out evenly and we're left with a nice thin shell. So clean. And then scrape it off and just clean your edges. And we'll just let that set up before we fill it. So next we're going to make the salted caramel filling for our chocolates. So what you need for this is some double cream, some vanilla, some glucose, some sugar and some butter. So nice simple ingredients. Salted caramel is a winner, everybody loves it, you can't go wrong. I have 125 grams of cream in this pan with 2 grams of sea salt and half a vanilla pod. And in this pan I'm going to caramelise 150 grams of sugar and 25 grams of glucose, and then at the end I'm going to emulsify in 10 grams of butter. So this pan's getting nice and hot for my caramel, so I'm just going to sprinkle some sugar in until it starts to melt. And while that's melting away, I've got my cream on the stove just coming up to the boil, so it's nice and hot, so that when I deglaze the caramel with it, it doesn't crystallise. So I'm just going to melt my sugar and my glucose a little bit at a time, just controlling the temperature so it doesn't get too hot, but we do want a nice dark caramel by the end of it because that flavour is really going to carry through, and if it's too sweet with the sweet chocolate shell, it'll just be too much. So that's why we introduce a bit of salt and we try and keep it nice and dark. My cream's up to the boil now, so I'm just going to turn that off and it'll sit quite nicely. All the while I'm melting my sugar just a little bit at a time. Just nice and slowly. A little bit at a time. So you want to make the filling first before you start any of your chocolate work, because then that's got time to cool down. Because if you pipe this into the moulds when it's hot, if it's anything over 30 degrees, it's just going to melt the chocolate. So ideally you want this nice and cool when you're piping it. I'm just going to go in with the last of my sugar there. Let it tick away slowly so we get a nice clear caramel. I don't want any sugar granules in this at all, because if there's any lumps of sugar left it'll crystallise, and if the chocolate's eaten in a week or a month they'll bite into it and the caramel will be crystallised, which will not be pleasant at all. So making sure each step of the way is perfect really helps you get the end product right. It may seem tedious at the time, but if you do a big batch of these and your caramel's crystallised, you're going to be kicking yourself by the end of it. Perfect. Now this caramel's starting to melt up. I'm just going to turn it down a wee bit, and I'm just wanting the colour on here now. So I'm just making sure I've got no sugar crystals around the side of my pan, and I'm just going to let this cook until I start seeing little bubbles, little foamy bubbles, and I see the colour go into a nice dark amber. If you take it too far, it's going to burn and it's going to be bitter, so it's a really, really fine line. But once I see almost like a froth on the surface, I know that I'm ready to go in with the cream. So that colour is perfect for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this heat right down and just take it off the heat slightly, and then I'm going to start to add my cream, and I've just got a whisk here to whisk it. So this is really quite hot, so you just need to be careful, and obviously if you're doing a bigger quantity you want a much bigger pot because it's going to bubble up a lot more. And I'm just adding my cream really gradually until I can finally get it all in, and I'll just use my spatula to scrape it all in to make sure it's all in there. And then we just pop the butter into there and whisk that in until it's emulsified. It'll melt straight away. And then we just leave the caramel to cool down. We need it under 30 degrees, and then we can pipe it into our molds. So that's our chocolate mould all nice and set up now. It's actually completely set so that you can take the shells out the cavities. So this is our design of our shell. Just pop that there. So that's our nice blue and silver. So what we're going to do, we're really looking for a nice thin shell around the edges here. This is what we want. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill this with the salted caramel that we made earlier on. So I'm just piping it into each cavity. It's quite thick, but I know it'll settle into the mould nicely, and I just want to leave a little space so that I can cap my chocolate and there won't be any caramel coming out the mould. So again, just each mould, filling it up. Just leaving space at the top. Overfilling your moulds is an absolute nightmare. It's such a headache because you just can't get a clean finish. And again, if any of the bottom's exposed when you cap it, if any of the filling's exposed, you will not have a shelf life on your chocolates. And if you're making them for production to sell, shelf life is such a big aspect. Perfect. So that's our filling in. It's all nice and settled and there's a lovely gap. What we're going to do now is we're going to cap it. And to do that we need our tempered chocolate from earlier on, which we still have. And you also need a sheet of acetate or guitar sheet. So we use this quite a lot for garnishes and decorations. Quite often we'll brush or splatter cocoa butter onto it and I will make a design with that. So what you need to do to cap, it just makes capping easier having this bit of plastic because it means you get a nice smooth bottom and you get a nice shiny bottom as well. Whereas if you can just cap it with chocolate and your scraper, but you quite often get drag marks and it's just not as clean a finish. So I always use a guitar sheet. I know a lot of chocolatiers use transfer sheets. If you had your own brand, you could have your own logo on the bottom of it. There's loads of really cool things you can do, but I just use a plain one. And what I do is I just get a little bit of chocolate. I really just want to cover the bottom of the mould. Usually bottom 2 rows is plenty. And all I'm going to do is just tilt that forward so the chocolate runs down. I'll pop my transfer sheet over the top, nice and easy. And I just push the chocolate down. And that leaves us with a really nice layer over our shells. I scrape off the sides. Scrape off the bottom. Just trying to keep this as clean as possible. The cleaner you keep this mould, the easier it is to clean when you're washing it. And believe me, the easier it is to clean, the faster you get your work done. So I'll just set this at the side and let it crystallise. Usually I'd leave that overnight and then I demold my chocolates and they're ready to eat. So our chocolates had time to crystallise overnight, and you can see here that the guitar sheet's coming off around the edges. And if you actually look closely at the mould, you can see where the chocolate's crystallised and retracted from the mould. So where it's slightly darker is where it's still kind of attached to the mould, but where it's nice and clear is where there's like a pocket of air in there because the chocolate's been tempered properly, it's crystallised and it's retracted, and that means we're going to get a nice shiny finish. So all we need to do is just crack the mould to just loosen up any bits that are still stuck to the top. I'm going to remove this, and then all we do is flip it over, tap, tap, again trying to catch any that fall, and tap, and that is us. So all our bonbons are out of the mould. We just line them up nicely, remove any feet, and then that is us. They're ready to go into boxes or as petit fours or just to eat for yourselves. Just make sure there's no excess chocolate around the bottom. We don't want that at all. And I always wear gloves when I'm doing this so that I don't get fingerprints on the chocolates. I'm also trying to touch them as little as possible, just so we don't get any dirty fingerprints on there. So that's our lovely sea salt caramel chocolates. Easy peasy. That's us.